A big thank you to our sponsor, Signature Books, for supporting us here at the Mormon News Roundup. Please go over to signaturebooks.com and check out some of the latest publications that they have. Currently, they have things like Lighthouse, the Gerald and Sandra Tanner story by Ronald V. Huggins, one of the stories about the two most famous critics of Mormonism today. We've also got the story of Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon, a biography, suffragist, senator, and plural wife. That one is by Constance Lieber. And then we've also got a really good one here called DNA Mormon by Benjamin E. Park. So for all of your interests in Mormon studies and research, go over to signaturebooks.com and support our sponsor. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Devery Anderson and Dives will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. Today is April 9th, 2023. I'm here with Devery Anderson of Signature Books. This is our one-year anniversary of the launch of the Mormon News Roundup. We're going to talk about that, the latest Signature Book happenings, and belated reactions from General Conference. How's it going, Devery?
It's going well.
Hey,
glad to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on. Now, if you want to get in touch with us, we're at MormonNewsRoundup.org or Kolob you can send us an email to Kolob@MormonNewsRoundup.org. And how can people get in touch with you, Mr. Anderson?
I'm just at Devery at signaturebooks.com.
Wonderful. Now, who are you, by the way? Who are you? You're kind of my boss, and this is actually kind of our first meeting, so to speak. But who are you, and what is your position at Signature Books?
All right. Well, I'm Devery Anderson, and I'm the marketing manager at Signature Books. I've been with Signature almost 12 years. I've been doing marketing for about 5.5 years now.
Now, tremendous. You run the Signature Book has an official podcast, and that's not this podcast, but it is the Signature Books podcast, and you have, I think, 14 episodes of the Signature Books podcast. What is the Signature Books podcast, and what's it all about?
Well, I think we're up to 19 now.
Oh, okay.
It started last year, and we try to highlight our authors as their books come out. We like to have them on to talk about them upon launch. It hasn't always worked out exactly that way. It's been kind of a slow process to get it going, but now we're on track and doing 2 per month. We like to release them on the 2nd and 4th Tuesday of each month. And sometimes if we don't have a release that month, like this month, we don't have a book coming out. So we'll be doing some other stuff. In the episode that'll come out next week, we interview 3 of the staff members, myself included, who have either recently released books or have them coming out. And in our cases, none of our 3 books are published by Signature, which is kind of odd, but there's reasons for that outside of Signature's wheelhouse for a couple of us. The other one already had a contract with Oxford before she started here. So we're talking about our forthcoming or recently released books on the next podcast. So that'll come out on Tuesday.
Now, who is the intended audience of the Signature Books podcast?
Anyone interested in Mormon history, Mormon studies, anyone who would be interested in a signature title. And we specialize in Utah Mormons in the West. We do history, biography, autobiography, contemporary issues. We do some fiction and some poetry. So our authors get a chance to talk about their books and on the podcast, and we're hoping that our readers and those who know about Signature will be interested enough to keep tuning in. We want to see our audience grow.
Yeah, I've listened to quite a few episodes. I haven't caught all 19 of them. Let me just ask you one more question about your Signature Books podcast. Why do you think people should listen to it? There's a lot of Mormon podcasts out there. There's a dime a dozen. There's Mormon Stories. There's Mormon Expressions. There's the LDS Church has its own a number of official podcasts. There's Mormon Land on the Salt Lake Tribune. There's a lot of YouTube channels. There's TikTok channels. The area, the market is pretty saturated. So
Right.
why should people listen to the Signature Book podcast? What makes you special, and what makes you listenable?
Well, for the most part, we focus on what we're doing at Signature. So if you're interested in one of our titles, one that's about to be released or has just been released, and you want to know a little more about it before you purchase it, this is a chance for the author and the publisher to discuss those books together. Because typically we will have read it in advance of talking to the author. So both parties on the podcast should be familiar with the title and know what to ask about it and assume what readers would want to hear about it. And it's just really an advertisement, for a half-hour to hour advertisement for our titles. And I know our authors go on other podcasts as well, and that's great. We want to give them all kinds of exposure. But our podcast just has that focus, really, for the most part, about Signature.
Yeah, you've had a lot of great conversations, and I would like to, give a 5-star review to your podcast. And by the way, to our listeners out there, if you could leave a 5-star on the Mormon News Roundup podcast, we'd be very grateful for that as well. And that brings us to our Mormon News Roundup joke of the week. We always have a Mormon joke of the week. Devery, are you ready for this?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so it's kind of a long one here, so you kind of have to stay with me. A Mormon walks into a bar. Just kidding. That's it. That's all you get. Okay, that was a close one. Okay. Now, I have a little slideshow that goes along with this. We're going to do a 1-year review here, Devery, and see what has the Mormon News Roundup, what has it accomplished, and what has it not accomplished. And before we get started on this, Signature Books used to sponsor the Mormon News Report. And that was kind of a similar thing to what we're doing. Why did you sponsor them? Why did you stop sponsoring them? Why did they kind of go out of business? Do you know the backstory to that?
Well, I just know we started sponsoring them when one of the hosts just brought it to our attention and asked if we would. And we stopped because they stopped. That's kind of really why it happened.
Okay. Well, we're kind of filling in the shoes. Obviously, there's also This Week in Mormons. There's Mormon Land. There's a number of Mormon-themed podcasts. We obviously think with a bias that we are the best. But let's look and see what it is that we've done this year, and hopefully we're giving you a bang for your sponsorship. So let's discuss that. We've had 53 episodes. That's one episode every single week of the entire year. This is episode 54. We have not missed one single week in that entire time frame, including Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we are very, very steady. Now, our podcast purpose is you're joining us for a weekly Mormon News Roundup, where we will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. That's our tagline. This entertaining weekly podcast is designed to be appealing to both faithful members, former members, and never members. We comb the internet every week to bring you the LDS-related news that you just can't find anywhere else. Now, obviously, the church has its own. It has KSL. It has the Deseret News. It has the church news, but you don't always get the 100% complete picture of the world of Mormonism from just following the so-called faithful church news sources. So we try to find the obscure news articles and maybe the most controversial ones. We like gossip. We like to get in there with the mud and see what's going on. So that's probably the purpose of this. That's definitely a purpose of it. Now, we run Mr. Anderson, we run a signature book ad, at least one in every single episode. And we link to signature books in all of the show notes, social media platforms, and websites. So I'll give you a sample ad here that runs with that we run with it. We have a number of different ads that we do run, but we could change all of these ads at the same time. So if you give us an ad or tell us, hey, we have a new book coming out, or we have some activity, we can en masse change every single one of the ads at the exact same time, and they could be updated every single week if you wanted to. But here's an example of one of those ads. I'm just going to play it for you. It's a minute long. Can you hear that?
Yes.
A big thank you to our sponsor, Signature Books, for supporting us here at the Mormon News Roundup. Please go over to signaturebooks.com and check out some of the latest publications that they have. Currently, they have things like Lighthouse, the Gerald and Sandra Tanner story by Ronald V. Huggins, one of the stories about the two most famous critics of Mormonism today. We've also got the story of Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon, a biography, suffragist, senator, and plural wife. That one is by Constance Lieber. And then we've also got a really good one here called DNA Mormon by Benjamin E. Park. So for all of your interest in Mormon studies and research, go over to signaturebooks.com and support our sponsor. Thank you.
What were your thoughts there on our, that's a sample ad there.
Yeah, I like that. I like how you direct people to the website so they can see everything that we've published, and also call out some of the titles, the recent titles. So that's great. That's what we like to hear.
Okay, that's what I was hoping you would say. Now we this like I said, we also have a video portion that goes along with our podcast. It's really, we kind of started that halfway through the year. It's taken me a long time to really figure out how to do this video casting stuff. The learning curve on this is very, very steep for me. So, but I'm getting the hang of it. So here's an example. We had some guest hosts on, and we'll just put up an article and we'll just talk about it. Salt Lake Temple renovations delayed, project to be completed. We'll just talk about what is the implication of that and what are your thoughts on that. Typical news articles. This is exactly what you would get. A couple of co-hosts, and that's what you get. We also have a Twitter account. It's on MormonNewsRoundup.org, and the actual Twitter handle here is @NewsMormon. We link to Signature Books for that. And here's our metrics for that. Tweet impressions. This is for just the last 30 days. We've had 500 tweet impressions, 65 profile visits. We tweet about once a week. So I didn't do the entire year, but if you're doing tweet impressions about 500 a month, I don't know, 6,000 impressions per year, that's a ballpark figure of what we're getting on Twitter. We certainly are. I don't get into the weeds of debating people or anything like that. This is a news program that is mostly just what are the interesting news articles with some small editorial takes. Definitely not getting into big Twitter fights with anybody. I think I can't stand that. We also have a YouTube channel, even though that most of this podcast is a podcast. It's just audio. We also upload the video. We also upload them onto YouTube, just so that people are on different platforms. They listen to them on a lot of different things, and we upload the audio portion onto YouTube, even though YouTube is just is mostly just a video platform. And our metrics there on I didn't include the metrics. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to our YouTube metrics. I think we are sitting at maybe 200 subscribers right now on YouTube, which for a podcast that does not have a video portion, I know that doesn't seem like much, but when you don't include the video on YouTube, you're not going to get a lot of listeners. So we also have a Patreon site here, which we have 2 Patreons that are kicking in about $55 a month. Those people have unlimited. They have access to all of the show notes, the detailed show notes, plus the video portion of the podcast. So we're on platforms. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on Google Podcasts. We're on CastBox, and then a number of other smaller platforms as well. But the lion share of our podcast is on Apple Podcasts. About 81% comes through Apple Podcasts. Now, the gender of folks who I was kind of surprised about the gender of the people who listen to this podcast. 46% of the people who listen to this podcast are women. 40% are men, and then the rest are either not specified or non-binary. But actually, a higher percentage of women listen to this podcast than men, which is very surprising to me, considering that I have a face that's made for podcasting. So that was interesting to me. The age of people who listen to the Mormon News Roundup, 8% are about 28 to 34, 12% are 35 to 44, 45% are 45 to 60. So the vast majority of the people who listen to this podcast are in the 45 to 60 year demographic, which is the approximate demographic of your humble host. So that, to me, makes a lot of sense. I guess we found our people. Our geographic location, we're mostly being listened to. 92% of our listeners come from the United States, 2% from the United Kingdom, 2% from Canada. Then we have a couple of other countries, Australia, France, Germany, Switzerland, and then the rest are pretty negligible. So, yeah, this is a United States-centered podcast. Our most popular episode here is actually from John Hamer. We had him on. The Community of Christ is having their World Conference here this month. And President Veazey stepping down, that was a big news. And we were lucky to get John Hamer on the program to talk about Community of Christ and President Veazey's transition. And it turned out that even though that episode's only been here for 3 weeks, that's our most popular episode. So John Hamer is quite a mover and a shaker. I think on his YouTube channel, some of his videos have had like 3 million views. He's a huge figure. We're very lucky to have him. Our second most popular episode was we had Radio Free Mormon on the program. He's definitely a linchpin in the Mormon podcasting community. And then another surprise to me is we had Chino Blanco, who does a lot of Reddit. He's a big time Redditor who does a lot of Mormon and FLDS and LDS News on Reddit. We had him on the program, and he has a giant following as well. It's really amazing to me, some of the guests that we've had on, how they really drive the program. People want to see these guests that we've had. And also we had Greg from Quick Media on the program. He runs a YouTube channel that has 30,000 followers. Having a Mormon channel with 30,000 followers, that makes him either the second or third biggest Mormon-related YouTube channel on the internet. We've had him on the program 2 times. So, yeah, we've had some good guests on the program. So for Anna, and if you have any questions, by all means, just jump in at any time, by the way. Now, okay. Devery, our Apple podcast, well, I actually just released, totaled it up from this last year. We've had 40,000 plays for the Mormon News Roundup in the last year. The engaged listeners is basically kind of like Apple's version of subscribers. You have maybe 400 or 500 subscribers. And engaged listeners, those are people who frequently interact with the podcast. So about 40,000 over the course of the last year. Our biggest month was last November. We had a huge spike in November, and I don't know the exact reason why. I can't figure out why it is that we had so many people in November. That's kind of a mystery to me. Our biggest cities for listening in the United States, our biggest city, is surprising, is Seattle, followed by New York City, followed by Salt Lake City. I couldn't believe that we had so many listeners in Seattle. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is with that. Only 61% of our listeners are subscribers, and only 39% are not subscribers. So I wish we could get more subscribers. I guess everybody does. Now, these are some of the metrics of our latest episodes. For instance, our last episode, which discussed how Joseph Smith versus Moby Dick is a kind of a funny episode. Our average consumption of listening on our podcast, when people, you say, okay, we had 40,000 listens just on Apple Podcasts last year. What percentage of people who start the podcast actually finish it? Because that's an important metric too. And if you look at average consumption, 95%, 100%, 97%, when people start this podcast, they finish it all the way. Almost, we have 90% of people who start this podcast finish it, which is really a tremendous number. Well, that was very surprising to me as well. So those are some of our metrics from Apple Podcasts. And our rating on Apple Podcasts is 4.3. Now, your rating on your podcast, Devery, is 5.0. So I guess we've got some work to do to catch up to you. But our 4.3 rating on Apple Podcasts, we hope to see that improve. We also have a website, MormonNewsRoundup.org, and you can see at the bottom it says sponsored by Signature Books. All of our episodes go onto there. And like I said, all of our social media all references Signature Books and everything that we do. Plus, we have an ad on everything that we do. Now, some of the guest hosts that we've had last year, we've had a tremendous number of guest hosts. And this is a little bit long, but we had Steve Pinecker from the Mormon Book Reviews. We had Christina from Latter-day Ramblings. We had Elder Suicide, who runs a popular YouTube channel. We had John Ogden from Uplift Kids, Greg Madsen from Quick Media, John Turner, did the keynote speak. He's a famous Mormon author. Devery, yourself, we've had you on 2 times. We appreciate that. We had Rebecca Biblioteca, who runs the Good Book Club. We have Dave, who runs the Mormon Renegade podcast. We have PD, who did the Priesthood Dispatches. We had RFM, Jim Bennett, who did the CS Letter Response. Rick Bennett, who runs the Gospel Tangents program. Ada does the Dissonant Daughters podcast. Morgan does My Spiritual Life on YouTube. Scott from Ramyington Ruminations. Ada, I had her on there twice. We have Evan, who has a popular Twitter account. White Cat Prophecy is also a famous Twitter account. We have Sophronia, who wrote the Elegy of Anathema, who's an author. We had Cardin Ellis from the Midnight Mormons, Chino Blanco. This isn't even everybody. We had a lot of people on this podcast in this last year, just a tremendous number of guests. So, yeah, we're not just sitting around in our basement thinking stuff up. We had a lot of people on. And what's interesting here, Devery, is that, almost, as you can see, the host that we have on is not just somebody from the Ward Relief Society. We try to go after, people who have a popular following, and they post. See, we had 40,000 listens on Apple Podcasts, but that doesn't include when we do an episode. You can see almost everyone that we've had on the show has their own podcasting platform, YouTube platform, whatever it is. So they will release the podcast onto their platform too. Now, I don't know how many listens all of them had on theirs, but I just took Radio Free Mormon, for instance, when he co-hosted and posted his on Mormon Discussions, it has 3,000 views by itself. So I think I'm kind of spoiling it, but if you take the 40,000 from Apple Podcasts, you throw on the 10,000 from Spotify, and maybe another 10,000 from all of our other platforms, just by ourselves, we're at 60. But if you toss in all of the rest of the fact that most of these people published it on their own platforms. I think that plus people listen to it in their browser. I think we're looking at around 100,000 total views of this podcast. And like I said, when people start the podcast, they typically finish it. So that is our bottom line number, is about 100,000 listens of this podcast in the last year. Okay, so our podcasting costs, I just thought I would break this down briefly for you. Web hosting costs us $100 a year. We bought a webcam, we bought a microphone, and then we also use Zencaster. That costs us about $200. So our total cost of this podcast are, what is that, about $500 in costs. And our revenue, your sponsorship, sir, Signature Books gives us about $10 an episode, or about $50 a month. And you paid us 8 months so far. You paid us about $400. I assume you're going to pay for the other $200. By the way, I'm certain we'll get caught up. Patreon, we've generated about $150 in Patreon dollars, and Anchor Spotify ads is about $50. So our total revenue after expenses is about $200. So that breaks down to about $3 an episode. So nobody's getting rich off of this one. Now, things I could do to increase the scope of the Mormon News Roundup and the reach of Signature Books. These are things that I could do. I used to do a Facebook page that was with Mormon News Roundup. It's just I didn't have the time to keep it all up. I could do Instagram. I could do TikTok. I could do YouTube Shorts. I could do Facebook Shorts. But for the roughly $10 an episode, I don't have time to do all of those items. It's just too much work. I couldn't even keep up with the Facebook, so I just do Twitter only now. Some of the things that I would humbly recommend or request from Signature Books, it would be nice if I had access to either a corporate unlimited Zoom or a StreamYard account. Do you guys have a corporate account for Zoom or StreamYard?
For Zoom, I believe we do. For I think Barbara has done that. It's not with the podcast, though. The podcast is through Zencaster. So is that what you're asking? Because Zoom we use for meetings and stuff, and I think we pay extra, so that must be a corporate one, but I don't have anything to do with that.
If I had access to a corporate unlimited Zoom or StreamYard account, that would be very helpful, because I paid $200 this year in Zencasting. It'd be nice if Signature Books would let me use their corporate account. Based on 100,000 downloads, that's off of $500. I think that we're worth, I would love to see an increase to $15 on that. I'm not going to use the missionary commitment pattern on you, but that's what I would love to see. I would also love to have access to more Signature Book authors for podcast episodes on the Mormon News Roundup. To have them come over my way, because I really have never really had any Signature Book authors on here. And, we're a small part of your family, very small, but very grateful part of it. We've never really had anybody on. It would be nice if we did. And the other one is, would you ever consider letting me do the official Signature Books podcast? Now, you do it twice a month, but I would be willing to do it once a week if you wanted that much access. I could have an author on every single week. Those are just items for you to ponder. I don't need an answer on those, but any thoughts on these requests from Signature Books, Devery?
I guess my thoughts need to give it some thought.
Okay. No problem. Now, I will also give you another quick pitch for a second channel for an additional sponsorship. I also run the Mormon Movie Reviews channel, and we're up to, I think, episode 87 of the Mormon Movie Reviews channel. We had 3,000 views of this channel just in the last, since it started. We have about 200 subscribers. These are some of the movie reviews that we've done recently. We did Mr. Kruger's Christmas. You remember that with Jimmy Stewart?
Yeah.
We also did Joseph Smith the Man with Lethe Tachi, where she shakes the hand of all the kids. That's kind of an obscure one.
I remember seeing that one.
Yeah, it's fun. We also did in Emma's Footsteps, which is very interesting. That review was kind of challenging because it was put on by the Joseph Smith and Emma Hale Smith Historical Society, and they copyright striked it right off the bat. But I reached out to the head of foundation, and he removed the copyright strike. So now it is living and breathing and copywriting. A couple of other ones as Saints and Soldiers, Uncle Ben, The Spirit of the Game. My intent on this, Devery, is to review every single Mormon movie that has ever really been released. And that could be maybe 300 or 400 movies total that are worth reviewing. These are typically 10-minute long reviews, although some of them are longer. If Signature Book would possibly be interested in sponsoring that endeavor for $10 an episode, that is another thing for you to think about. This is the last month. 52 hours of watch time on the Mormon Movie Reviews and about 500 views a month, subscribers. So that's 5,000 per year. I know that's small, but I think that it's going to grow over time. So some conclusions. First of all, I am extremely grateful for Signature Books' support. Now, you'll notice that I did not mention Al in this, and this is to all our listeners and also to you as well. Al just recently informed me that he's looking to step back from weekly co-hosting, and he only wants to do monthly co-hosting. So, but never fear, I have no plans to stop this podcast because Devery, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. Any thoughts here? That's my slideshow for you on the Mormon News Roundup. What do you feel like your investment with this podcast is worth it? You know, what is your honest opinion? Is the return on investment, is it worth it? 100,000 views, is that cutting the mustard? What do you think?
Yes, I think with the amount of exposure you give us between social media and the podcast itself, I think so. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed by all of that.
Well, I have to admit that was what I was hoping you would say. So you can think up those other, you can definitely think of those other things that I brought up, and you know, just think about those, and you know, you can get back to me another time on that. Now that does take us to our second segment of this podcast, Signature Book. Devery, you put out a newsletter every single month, and what is going on with Signature Books, and either in those recent past or what's happening in the recent future, or not recent future, but what's happening? What's going on out there?
What's upcoming? Yeah.
Yeah, well, upcoming. Yeah.
We've started having events at our offices. We have an office upstairs. Upstairs in our office, we have a library area with a lot of seating room. And we have a podium and stained glass windows, very nice setting, and we decided to start having events here. The goal has been to have them monthly. We're not going to get every month, but I think we'll probably get about 10 in this year. And we had a panel discussion in January discussing the DNA Mormon book, which is essays on the legacy of D. Michael Quinn. And we had a panel of some of the people who provided essays for that book that came here. We discussed their essays, and we had a nice turnout and a nice time. Benchmark Books was here selling books, and we were selling some of our own titles at discounted prices as well. Then in February, we had, in March, we had another group discussing this Dr. Clandestine pamphlet. That was an episode from 1977, an anonymous pamphlet that was written as a response or a refutation to Gerald and Sandra Tanner's Mormonism, Shadow or Reality. And that was discussed in Leonard Arrington's diaries, in the Tanner's biography that we published, and also in D. Michael Quinn's memoir that we're about to publish. And so we had representatives of each of those titles discuss this kind of strange, fascinating episode from 1977. And we had copies of the pamphlet as well for sale. And later this month, we're having a poetry night. This month is National Poetry Month, and we're celebrating that by having an event at our offices with many of our poets who've published with us over the years. They're going to be here reading from their poetry, and we're kind of highlighting our most recent releases, which is Dana Patterson's book, Oh Lady, Speak Again, and Utah's Poet Laureate, Lisa Bickmore. Her book, Haste, which we printed in 1994, has just been reprinted in celebration of her becoming the Utah Poet Laureate. So they'll both be here, as well as some of our other poets from the past several years who've published with us. So looking forward to that. If you like poetry, if you have questions on, usually at a poetry reading, up-and-coming poets or those who want to write poetry will have a lot of questions asking poets, their creative process, how they write, what mood they have to be in. And so if you're interested in writing poetry, you could probably get some good insights and some good advice. If you like to listen to poetry, you'll hear some excellent poetry being read. So come join us on April 26th at Signature Books at 7 p.m. I think you'll like it.
Yeah, and for those listeners out there, if you're interested in what's happening with Signature Books, then you can subscribe to the newsletter as well, and that comes out every month, right?
Yes, we try to get it out the first week of the month now, and we've been doing good with that. We've kept up on it this year. Some of these things are pretty new things we started in the last few years, and some of it's taken a while to get going and to be consistent, and we're there now with that and the podcast. Those are things we just developed in the last couple of years, and so we're happy to be doing that. And we have a YouTube channel as well. So those three things we're trying to keep up on and give people more ways to reach us or keep up with us, what we're doing, and to make these things available. A lot of our people who read our books aren't available for events in Utah, and most of the book signings we have are in Salt Lake or Provo. And so if you're not around here, the YouTube channel where authors will read from their books or discuss their titles, you'll have a chance to participate or at least take part in the next best thing to a book signing through our YouTube channel. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that D. Michael Quinn memoir here, that's going to be that's a highly anticipated book, isn't it?
Yes, and that one you're showing there is not the memoir. I think you'll need to scroll down a little bit. That's a book about him that others, that's the essays in honor of.
Here it is.
Quinn. And that one there is the memoir that's coming out this summer.
A Chosen Path, and it was. His descendants only discovered his memoir on his computer. It was never really presented, right? Just recently. What is the history of that briefly?
Yes, it's something I'm not sure when he started writing it, but he updated it off and on throughout the years. And this was the latest version. And it's one I know he wanted to have published, but sadly he passed away before it could be done. And so now, with the family's blessing, we're publishing it. And because he has passed away, we felt that we had to annotate it somewhat, which had he been alive, it probably wouldn't have turned out that exact same way. But usually when you publish something posthumously, the publisher or an editor will explain some things in footnotes that we probably would have asked the writer to do in the editing process, maybe add some explanatory stuff in the text itself, but we don't want to insert our own voice in the memoir, so that we'll have footnotes now, so it'll be annotated. Try to keep, to what, retain Mike's voice, so the text you read will be all his, I believe, and with annotations. And so because we've had to go through that process of annotating it, it's taken a little bit longer, but it's going to be better as a result, and we're looking forward to that coming out. I think everyone's been fascinated by Mike Quinn over the years, certainly his writings. And when you have if you're a fan of an author, I think very often you like to see what made them tick, and so that's what this memoir will provide for those who are fans of Mike's writings.
Now, Barbara Jones Brown is the head of Signature Books, the CEO, right?
She is the director of Signature Books, so that's not her title. The company's owned by George Smith, and so he's his title here has always been publisher, but company director is Barbara Jones Brown.
And I know she's calling for a lot of works, especially from women authors or from underrepresented groups. Is that correct? That's who you're really hoping for manuscripts from, those type of persons. Is that right?
Yes, definitely want more women authors. We've published a few biographies of prominent Latter-day Saint women this last year. One was on Susie Young Gates, and the other was on Martha Hughes Cannon. So we'd love to see more women's subjects, whether it be biography or publishing their own writings. We do a lot of documentary history. We do diaries, and I'd like to see more women's diaries. Utah State University has done a great series on women's diaries that I think they're done. I haven't seen one come out for several years, but there are a lot more diaries that could be published. And I'd love to see some great women historians take on books about women or books by women, publishing their personal writings. So we would love to see more of that, definitely.
Does Signature Books publish fiction or historical Mormon-related fiction?
Yes, we do. Generally about one fiction title per year. We did one of our most recent, Levi Peterson, who published The Backslider with us, published a book of short stories with us last year, or it may have been 2021. And we also, Richard Van Wagner, Robert Van Wagner, published a psychological thriller with us called The Contortionists a couple years ago. So if you like that type of work, that was a really good one. And he did a great job with that. And so I recommend The Contortionist to people, recommend these book of short stories, and we have more coming. And the same with the poetry. We generally publish a book of poetry every year, and our latest, we did 2 because we reprinted Lisa Bickmore's book, Haste. So we have 2 fresh books of poetry that have just came out in February.
Two more questions on Signature Book stuff. First of all, if someone wants to submit a manuscript for consideration to Signature Books, what is the process?
Well, you'll submit the manuscript to we have an email address to send those to. I'm not the acquisitions person, so offhand I can't remember what the email address is, but it'll say it on our website. It may be just people@signaturebooks.com, or there might be submissions@signaturebooks.com too. On that, I honestly don't remember because I don't do those. But you can send. I'm not sure if they ask for a completed manuscript or some sample chapters and a cover letter giving a synopsis. I think you can do that or submit the full manuscript, and it'll go through a process here. We have an editorial board that'll make recommendations. We screen them initially, and then the ones that we think we would be interested in, we then give to the editorial board, and then we'll have final approval or rejection at that point.
One more question.
We're always looking for great manuscripts, though. So
you bet. Now, I want one more question. I have a friend who submitted a manuscript to Signature Books. It was called Elegy of Anathema. Are you at all familiar with that, or has it not reached your level yet?
It hasn't come to me.
Okay. All right.
And it wouldn't come to me until it's ready to be published. I can start marketing it at that point.
Okay.
So.
You're the kingpin then. You're the you're the final boss, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, very well. Now, for those of you out there, if you will please give us a thumbs up, if you will please subscribe, we really appreciate that. Devery, can we go through a couple of Mormon news articles for this week, which, of course, the Mormon News Roundup is all about the news. And I know some of this will just be a hot take on your part, because I know that you're a busy man. You haven't necessarily looked at all of these articles, but people are interested in what you have to say. So let's hop into the news and cover a couple of news articles. So the jury selection here, this was published on KSL here just a couple of days ago on April 3rd. Jury selection underway on the first day of Lori Vallow Daybell trial. So this is just going to be an amazing trial to follow, because of course she and also her husband Chad Daybell were involved in the grisly killings of around 5 people. And we did back in the Mormon movie reviews, by the way, and also on this podcast, we did full review of Sins of Our Mother, the Netflix series, which really chronicled her life. And that was a fascinating look. And we covered all of those episodes here on the Mormon News Roundup and also on the Mormon movie reviews. This is going to be a huge trial in the Mormon-related world. The jury selection began last Monday, just a couple of days ago, and the judge, prosecution, and defense team questioned groups of potential jurors throughout the day, and they were left with 17 jurors who have been approved. So Vallow and Daybell, they've been charged with 7 felonies. They're accused of murdering their 2 children, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Vallow, she's also accused of conspiring to murder Daybell's late wife, Tammy Daybell. She's pled not guilty. So, Devery, is this going to be the biggest Mormon-related trial since Jodi Arias?
Oh, I'm sure of it. And it's such a bizarre case. And having worked in the book world, not only as in publishing, but also in retail, I know that Chad Daybell's books now, I think, are become more collectible because he was an author. And so there's that element that it reminds me a lot of the Elizabeth Smart kidnapping, because the man and woman who kidnapped her, they had been workers in the Salt Lake Temple, and that book on the Salt Lake Temple that had photos of past temple workers had photos of them in the book. And I know that book became more valuable as a result of this. So it kind of reminds me of just the bizarreness and how there's the whole trial, which people are going to be fascinated by. And then in the Mormon world, just these other things that kind of crop up that a lot of people aren't going to even be thinking about, but just what it means for just the whole tragedy of the whole thing, and just how bizarre it is, and what it even means for the book collecting world. Not that that's important. This is such a tragedy, but it does affect that, and you see that, and you see kind of people now wanting to collect this stuff, and so that adds kind of another bizarre twist to the whole thing. But it's gonna be big, and I'll be following it closely for sure.
Yeah, the media, they just love true crime. First of all, true crime is one of the biggest genres that's hot around these days. And when it comes to Mormons and true crime together, when you put those two things together, if you think about Murder Among the Mormons, which Netflix put out last year, that was like their number 3. Under the Banner of Heaven, that was true crime as well, even though it was fictionalized. Still, it was based off of a true story. The Keep Sweet, Pray, and Obey, which is where Warren Jeffs, he was accused of a felony. That's crime as well. He ended up going to prison. So the people who are involved with these type of things, the filmmakers and also book writers, everybody, the media is going to have a feeding frenzy over this, because also the media, they love to portray Mormons as crazy, as delusional, as just nuts. And if the media wants to portray, hey, if you believe in Mormonism and in God, look what's going to happen to you. This is the logical conclusion. So everyone is going to be circling the wagons. This is going to be a crazy circus that is just, the trial is starting in Idaho soon. And unfortunately, I can't wait. I'm going to be on the edge of my seat. Any other thoughts on this one, Devery?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's so true. People do like true crime, and Mormon true crime seems to be the craziest of all, and it's portrayed that way. And then we had that recent killing of that family by the father. Now they're all dead, and so there's not going to be a trial there. But that just, all the questions that are swirling about that whole situation. Man kills his wife and all of his children, then himself and his mother-in-law. And so, and so many people are talking about what did Mormonism itself have to do with this? What was his relationship with Mormonism that led him to do something like this? And that's a question people are asking. And with them all being dead, there'll be a lot of speculation in this case, and it'll go on for a long time. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the murder of the Utah family, which sparked an online battle over Mormonism. This is the David Haight and Enoch back in January. The Enoch, are you referencing the Michael and Tasha Haight family? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and offhand I couldn't remember their names, but yeah, that's it. And seeing all those caskets there together, that's just sends chills down your spine.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this is going to be grisly. This is going to be absolutely incredible. And it's not just the David Haight one. We also have the Colorado dentist just a couple of just 2 weeks ago, who is also a Mormon. He was also an Elders Quorum president. He was charged with poisoning his wife slowly over the course of a couple of weeks. So, these Mormons, sensational, anything that, is violence and Mormons and extremism and things like this, heinous, complex, these type of things, the media is going to eat it up. This trial has been building for years. They were locked up, I want to say 3 years ago. So there's going to be an unprecedented level of coverage on this. And I guess I'm kind of sick and twisted because, honestly, I'm sorry, I can't wait for this trial to begin. I guess there's something wrong with me because I'm just like the mainstream media. I can't wait until I'm hoping that we get justice served. I guess that's what I'm hoping for here.
Yeah, for sure. And it's natural, I think, to be curious about all this stuff and to want to follow it, because especially when it's in, like, if it's within Mormonism, we're part of that, and so that's our interest is going to be more above different from what the general public's would be. They're going to have an interest anyway, but add the fact that we're inside the fold to some extent, that adds so much interest for us, because right away if there's any way that the religion itself was involved, we kind of know where they're going with it, and we kind of know what questions to ask or what aspects that could have played a role in someone's mind. And so it's a lot different than just hearing about a case and being cold to the culture around it. We're not cold to that. We're well aware of it, and so that adds so much intrigue to the whole thing.
It'll be very interesting for me to see how the church responds to it, because this is going to be hitting every single newspaper across the country. This is going to be one of the biggest trials of the year. without question. How will the church respond to it? If you think back to how did the church respond to the Under the Banner of Heaven series, which was released on Hulu and FX last year, they only responded to it in one way, by releasing a Deseret News editorial. Only one bite at the apple. Will the church have any official responses to say, hey, we've excommunicated Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. They're not members of the church. We just want to say that we're going to distance ourselves from this, because they didn't do that with Under the Banner of Heaven. Will they have an aggressive response to this? What do you think?
It's hard to say on that. I mean, sometimes I think they know when it's to their benefit to do that, and when it's to their benefit to just be silent. I remember when there've been so many criticisms of the church over the years publicly, like with the God Makers video or movie that came out in the 80s. They didn't really say much about that, but when these researchers came out with this book that got a lot of attention about the Spalding manuscript, going back to saying that Solomon Spalding actually wrote the Book of Mormon, the church, had several responses to that. And I think the more bizarre and easily refutable the issue that they're talking about, or that's in the air, the more they can refute it and not create unwanted attention or raise more questions than they answer, then I think they'll often do it. And so I think that's that'll be the key here. Will a response be seen as being just superficial, weak, and will it raise more questions than it answers? And I think they'll think of all that very carefully, and it's hard to say where they'll come down on that. So.
Yeah, it is. Now, our next article here was released on March 31st, 2023. This was on Axios that was released here. New poll suggests that Mormon outreach to other faiths is unreciprocated. So there's a poll here that's released, and it talks about how religious groups say they feel towards Latter-day Saints, whether they have a positive perception of them or whether they have a negative perception of them. And this is very interesting. The only group who was surveyed here who has actually a positive perception of Latter-day Saints is Catholics. Jews, evangelical Protestants, atheists, agnostics, nothing in particular. All of these have negative perceptions of Latter-day Saints. Only Catholics in particular have a favorable view of Mormons. And it also talks about how, the church, this article goes through and it interviews Benjamin Park with regards to this. And it says the church has made a number of overtures over the years, especially to the evangelical community, in a number of different ways. But evangelicals' disapproval of Latter-day Saints is particularly notable because the church has made, so many efforts to forge bonds and highlight similarities between Mormonism and evangelical Christianity, both in publications, at universities, and by, the church has joined other conservative faith groups in legal battles with evangelicals. I would say that the group that the church, Latter-day Saints want to reach out to evangelicals probably more than any other group on the planet. And what this article shows is that outreach, it's not being reciprocated. Why do you think that people have a negative perception of Mormons? And in particular, why do you think that the evangelical outreach is not being very successful?
Well, just my own experience, I know that, like with Catholics, for example, it doesn't surprise me that there's a better view, because I think that relationship, even though, we all remember the story about Bruce R. McConkie and Mormon doctrine and calling the Catholic Church the great and abominable church, and the effect that had. But right away, David O. McKay and others tried to remedy that as best they could. And we even, in the 19th century, we had a great relationship well, I don't want to say great, but I think a good relationship with Catholics. We supplied a choir, I remember once, for their mass when they didn't have enough people to fill it. And they've had a lot of back and forth with Catholics over the years that I could understand that there might be something, a better relationship with evangelicals, because it's been harder to penetrate that group, because I think with just their view on they're more dogmatic in their views as far as what's going to send you to heaven, what's going to send you to hell, and the whole idea of, outside of the mainstream Christianity, very often you're seen as a cult. And so to get around that, even in trying to partner in just community projects, stuff that where we can work together to make the world better. It's very hard to get past what they see as doctrinally Mormonism as a cult, and they're more hardline about that than I think any other Christian religion, just the evangelicals. And so getting past the doctrinal differences that scare them about Mormons. I mean, I remember that Godmakers movie made its rounds to the evangelical churches, and so there's always been some animosity and fear and suspicion there that is going to be there, and no matter what else we try to do together. And I think that it's going to be that way as long as this kind of black and white thinking on heaven, hell, what sends you there, what keeps you from going there. And I think it's reflected in the views of each other, or of them towards us anyway.
It could be also, the Catholic Church is a very it's a very hierarchical structure, which fits very well with Mormonism. There's bishops, there's archbishops, there's a pope. It's priesthood authority. We're the only true church. There's a lot of similarities between Mormons and Catholics, quite frankly, and maybe some of those similarities between evangelicals they may be superficial, and they're just the church has tried to reach out so many times to the evangelical community, and they keep trying to rebrand themselves really with the goal of becoming more palatable to Protestants in particular, because I believe that two-thirds of the converts to the church are Protestants, 2/3. So that is the demographic that the church really wants to be as appealing to as possible, because that is the people that we're trying to get to join the church. But it's just not being reciprocated, and no matter what the efforts are, and it's kind of a mystery as to why.
You see the occasional stray evangelical, I guess, who will write about the Book of Mormon, or there's the evangelical pastor, I think, who has a popular YouTube channel now where he's always discussing Mormonism. No, I'm not talking. And then there's Mormon book reviews too, where Steve is evangelical and has a fascination with Mormonism. And so we're seeing some stuff like that, but that's just they're the outliers really when it comes to that. And I'm not saying any of them are believers in Mormonism, but having a going out of their way to have a friendly relationship with Mormons, and finding it fascinating enough that it's worth their while to investigate in a somewhat positive way. Like to see more of that, but they're definitely the outliers. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like the Chosen series with Dallas Jenkins, he's said a number of very nice things about Mormons. He seems to be very accommodating, and he is a very well-received person in the Mormon community, but that causes a great deal of consternation and confusion on his side of the aisle. And people don't like that he's so open to Latter-day Saints. They think that is a betrayal of the Christian heritage. So it just shows how difficult it is to actually build any bridges.
Right.
Yeah. Now our next article here. Let's get some brief general conference hot takes from you here, Devery, and then we're going to wrap things up here. President Nelson in the last general conference, once again, in the last general conference, he announced 18 new temples, and in this general conference, he announced 15 temples. That brings the total amount of temples that are either announced or the ground has been dedicated to 315 temples.
Yeah. And it's amazing. I when I heard that announcement, I couldn't remember how many there were at the last one. So there were 18, I guess, then back in October. And I can't remember how long it took to get the first 18 temples. I can't remember what number the Washington D.C. one was. That was built in 74 around
74.
There. And then just in one swoop, all these, that almost the same number that it took 140 years to build. But at the same time, then we get those in just one announcement. But at the same time, many of those temples are sitting empty and not getting a lot of use, at least much of the time. I don't know if that's the case all the time. Need to look into that a little bit more. But I'm sure the thinking on there is that placing the temple within a community will help strengthen that community, reactivate people. There'll be more attention given to the temple, And I'm not sure if that's playing out. It may well be in some cases or in all cases, but I'm sure that's the thinking there, that these temples will just create greater interest, and that it's kind of an investment that will take a while to pay off. And if they see it that way, and they, certainly have these discussions and know more about all that than I would, as who's not sitting in with them. There's a lot of criticism, I know, from people who say, why are we building so many temples? We could use that money for something else. And I think there's some validity to those criticisms too. Like we have, some communities now, it seems like there are a few temples, like Rexburg, Idaho's getting a second one. And, when I was a student at Ricks College, we went to Idaho Falls, and now, and I thought it was something when Rexburg got one, but now another one in Rexburg itself. And maybe there are enough students that keep the one busy, because BYU Idaho's grown a lot. I have to assume they know what they're doing. And it would be dumb for me to say, oh, no, they need to be doing this and this and this and that, because I'm not in on those conversations where they examine all this stuff probably in great detail. So I'm thinking that in time it'll pay off. I think it'll increase activity, increase membership, and I think that's what the intent is, where for now some of those really are, I think, pretty empty a lot of the time.
Yeah, to answer your question here, to get to the first 15 temples, the Joseph Fielding Smith dedicated the Provo Temple in 1972. So I guess you could say from First Vision, if we give the First Vision at 1820, it took 150 years to get to 15 temples, and now we're getting 15 temples announced in just one conference. Yeah,
it's something to, and I don't know how long, it'll be 315 now. I don't know how long it took us to get 315 chapels throughout the world. It'd be kind of fun to know how long that part took. And it's interesting too, when you look at, I think at this conference too, and I don't know if you plan to talk about this, I don't want to get ahead of you, but they announced that we're now over 17 million members. And I don't know how many active members that means. I know you could probably take all the number of wards and branches, figure out what the average attendance is and all those, and times it by the number of wards and branches to get a figure. I mean, some wards are large, some are very, very small. So I don't know what the average, would be. It would take some time to calculate that. And maybe you have, or maybe you have an idea of what the number of active members are of that 17 million. But I'm sure by now, when I went on my mission, and that was in 1979, I think we were at about 4.5 million members total then, or 3.5 or 4.5, I can't remember. And I'm sure now we're at the point where at least we have as many active members as we had total membership back in 1979. I've often thought of that, like, had everybody been active, would we have these 300 and some, back then, if 3.5, 4.5 million people were active, how many temples, would we have had back then? And so I often think that what we see now is kind of what we had, in the early 80s in total membership, and that's what the number of active ones that we see now. So gives you kind of some thought on what the church would be like if everybody was active. We would have maybe had 300 some temples years ago. But at the same time, that's very unrealistic. No religion has everybody active. But I think about that because, 17 million on the rolls, what does that really mean? I don't know if it means much, because church doesn't mean a lot to at least half of those people. So.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. If everyone who was active back when you were a missionary, if every single member of the church was active, the church wouldn't have had that many temples. For the simple fact of the matter is that in the early 70s, the church did not have enough money to build that many temples. Because the church was in the early 1960s was in a great deal of financial difficulties. And it took decades until we got out of that really mess that David O. McKay got us into by building too many meeting houses. They tried to extend it out too far. Bad idea. It wasn't until the mid-90s and until N. Eldon Tanner came in, fixed the finances, until really President Hinckley really took it by the reins, until we got the founding of Ensign Peak in 1997 with a $7 billion investment arm until we got that figured out. So no, I don't think we would have that many temples, even if everyone was active. That's number one. Number two, yeah, as far as activity rates are concerned, it's very simple for me to think about activity rates in the following way. If you pay tithing to the church, and I really don't care if it's a full tithing or partial tithing or any tithing whatsoever, if you pay tithing to the church, I really consider you to be an active member. And for the vast majority of people, if you don't, then I don't consider you to be an active member. And we discussed this last week in that the Widows' Might Report released an analysis of several countries, Australia, UK, Canada, the Netherlands. Those countries require institutions to discuss and disclose how many tithe payers and the amount of tithing that is received from those tithe payers. So we can extrapolate and say what percentage of people in those countries are full tithe payers. And the total percentage in those particular countries is right at around 25%. I know those are developed countries. It might be a little different in some Latin American countries. It might be less. But really, if most of those developed countries are at 25% and most Latin American countries are at 20%, you're looking at, I don't know, about 4 million active members. So that's just a simple way for me to think about it.
Oh, okay. But do you think back then, if everybody was active and paying tithing, we could have afforded those temples?
No, I don't think that we could. We still would not have been able to afford it. Especially, you went on your mission. We weren't out of the financial mess. They were talking about, the church used to release its financials all the way up until, I believe it was 1959, and then they stopped. And my understanding is from reading, and also from D. Michael Quinn, is that the church in 1960 almost didn't make payroll for church employees. It was that bad. So you're talking about a net valuation of the church in 1960 of zero. Building a temple, when you build a temple, the Widows' Might Report also did an analysis of temple construction costs. The average temple in our modern day society costs about $1,100 per square foot to build. And the average temple, especially back in those time frames, those were very large temples. We'll just say that the average temple at that time frame was around 70,000 square feet because they were larger back then. So you're looking at an average temple cost of around, $90 million. And that's a general average cost. When you times that by 300, the church just did not have, even with more tithing receipts, would not have been able to build the temples that it had back then based off of the finances, unless the Lord cranked out a miracle. And
then to maintain them on top of that, too. So
yeah, maintain them on top. One last thing about the temples. This is the first time that we had, in a while, that we had no temples that were announced in Utah.
Yeah, I noticed that. I thought about that as well.
Yeah, and you also talked about temple utilization, Devery. We covered this in an article a couple of weeks ago, is that somebody wrote a script, because in a lot of temples you have to have an appointment to do endowments, to do sealings, to do initiatories. So somebody wrote a program that went into the church's scheduler, which is online when you schedule your temple appointment, and they culled, C-U-L-L-D-D, they culled all of the appointments for every temple across the entire church for a period of time to figure out the utilization rate of the temples across the entire church for a period of time. And it looks like the average utilization of any given temple on any given date is around 20%. So these are not highly utilized buildings if those numbers are accurate, and I see no reason that they're not accurate. Any other thoughts on temples here before we go on to, we just have 2 more articles to get through, and then that's about it.
No, I'm good.
Okay, now our next article here, and this is kind of in your neck of the woods here, Devery, is because President Nelson, one of his big calls for General Conference was that he was calling for peace. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I know that based off of your background and your book of Emmett Till and your, really, I don't know if I want to call it activism, but your experience working with certain populations where peace seems to be something that's very important. I thought it would be interesting to get your take on President Nelson's call for peace.
And I didn't hear the talk, and so what was the context? I know he's talked about racism before and just purging ourselves of any thoughts of racist views or discrimination or desire to discriminate, that type of thing. Was that the context there? Yeah,
he's basically taking the next level. He's talked a lot about racism and eliminating that from our lives, and he really took that to the next logical step, which was he was talking about a lot about kindness, about not name calling, especially about not provoking online arguments, about social media, about being kind to other people on social media, about how the world needs more peace, and that Latter-day Saints need to be front and center on that. I thought it was a nice message.
Yeah, and I think, it's an important one right now, because when he talks about social media and how we're very polarized politically, within the church, each side can't fathom why the other side thinks the way they do, politically. And so we have a lot of that. And I think there's times that there are just may come out in priesthood meetings. Someone says something. I remember a priesthood meeting a while back I was in. A gentleman in there talked about, I think it was the something going on. I don't know if I can't remember if it was, it was the wildfires in California. And he made a point to say, well, it's because it was Democratic California. That's why the Lord sent these fires. And to say something like that in a priesthood meeting, obviously, you're not going to you're either going to make people very angry at you, or you have to be at quite an extreme in your thinking to agree with that. So to those kinds of divisions, I think you see people will pop up and take little jabs and things like that. And it kind of disrupts the whole meeting. Social media, now everybody's connected to everybody. And yeah, it's well known now that there are a lot of fights and arguments, and within families, within friendships have been lost. Family members are holding grudges because of how we're connected constantly now, and so everybody knows everybody's thoughts about everything, and so that creates a lot of division. And I think so it is a different world now that we live in than we did just 20 years ago. And I think it's an important message to, when we talk about a changing world and how to address things, I think that's the perfect talk for something like that, to have us reassess and, let go of all this stuff. It takes a lot more effort to just be mean and to be divisive and to be polarizing than it does to find common ground and to work at something good, with everybody. Not everybody's politics defines, politics don't really define a person. We have, ideas on child rearing and relationships and all this stuff where we might agree, but politics somehow, if we're divided there, then it seems to be what's supposed to define us. And so there are a lot of things we can have common ground on. So just, having us kind of think again and about all this, to be kind, to get rid of prejudice, to get rid of all the stuff that divides us, I think is a good message. It's a really good one. Hopefully where this exists within the church, people will listen to that, take it seriously, take it to heart, and do something about it. So hopefully maybe we'll see some little changes emerge as a result of this. I hope so.
It also could be a reaction to the fact that he's getting the Mandela Peace Prize coming up. So I think there may be some connection to the fact that he's getting the Gandhi Mandela Peace Prize coming up here at Morehouse College, that now he's talking about peace. So
yeah, that's right. And I think the relationship with the NAACP and the Reverend Amos Brown, I believe his name is, who's been with the NAACP forever, who was Kamala Harris's pastor in San Francisco. He and President Nelson have become good friends. I think he referred to Nelson as his brother from another mother. And so I think that relationship with the NAACP, trying to, kind of make up for the years that we, weren't treating our black brothers and sisters very well with the policies we had, to try to make up for that. And I think that relationship there with the NAACP has had a positive effect on him as well. And I think he's preaching what he's, experiencing from that relationship too. So.
Absolutely. Now, there was a little bit of controversy here. This is our last hot take on this general conference here. I'm not sure if you caught this talk, but it seems to have gone viral here. Amon Corbett was the first counselor in the Young Men's Presidency. He's now been called as a General Authority 70, but his particular soundbite here seems to have rubbed some people the wrong way. I want to get your hot take on this, Devery. Not sure if you caught this one. I believe it was on Saturday morning session. But some people are saying that this particular soundbite seems to be that Brother Corbett, now Elder Corbett, seems to be arguing that we should place the church before our own children. I want to get your thoughts on this. Let me play this for you and see what you think.
Parents, if your child struggles with a gospel principle or prophetic teaching, please resist any type of evil speaking or activism toward the church or its leaders. These lesser secular approaches are beneath you and can be lethal to the long-term faithfulness of your child. Parents.
What is your thoughts here briefly on his thoughts there about the relationship of if your child is having difficulty with the church, what you should do, what your priorities should be? What are your thoughts?
Well, and it was hard to really understand what he was really getting at without seeing the whole talk, I suppose. But it's kind of a hard one to be able to answer without knowing the rest of that. But I think if he's saying that, if a child is doubting or having some issues, do we not reach out and say, I understand where you're coming from because, of this teaching or that teaching? It seems like you don't have to go to maybe, when he talks about activism and I don't know, did he say activism against or speaking evil of the church and leaders? Did he? Because you can still find a place to say, yeah, I understand. I don't agree with what so-and-so said. I don't agree with so-and-so's views on this. I think the church will get better about how it treats this group or that group without having to resort to what he's saying. I don't think it's an either or thing. And that's just what I'm gathering out of that. I think you can still approach things. One thing I've noticed, in talking to reading general authority diaries, reading, or even in talking in a few cases to general authorities who have been candid with me about certain things, they don't see each other the way they want us to see them. And I think I can't remember if it was President Nelson or somebody talked about how, the apostles all have their own individual views and they'll present those views, but at the end they're unanimous on stuff. I think, to whatever degree that the brethren argue with each other about things and don't see eye to eye on things, why can't the general church membership take that same approach when they need to, when discussing issues that maybe the church has come down on? I mean, like with the policy on same-sex marriage back in 2015, people disagreed with that like crazy. A lot of people left the church over it. And then a few years later, they reversed it. So are they saying that during that time it was in place, we should have supported it, and now we don't have to? Or were we right to reject it or question it when it was in place? The fact that they did away with it, I think, tells me that we were just fine to disagree with it. Those who disagreed with the black policy when it was in force, who rejected this idea that blacks were cursed from the pre-existence and this and that, those who disagreed with it when the policy was in place, when you were hearing Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph Fielding Smith and others advocate that blacks were cursed to the pre-existence, would we have been right to teach our children, just don't believe that, this is going to change one day? Or should we have gone along with it? Are they saying we should go along with it until they tell us, no, that's just folklore, you don't have to believe it anymore? There's not ever a good reason to believe false things, just to support them while they're in place. And if your gut and conscience are telling you that something's wrong, I think you can present that to your children, do it in a positive way where they don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. If church is important to you and you want them to stay in, don't lie to them and don't tell them things are good that are bad. Because I think sometimes our gut and our conscience, there's enough precedent in the church that I think we know sometimes when things are going to that certain things will change down the line. I'm confident on a few things right now that I think will change in time. So teach them to have patience, teach them to endure, teach them to speak their mind, but in a loving way, and then hope that will suffice. That's how I see it. I'm not going to go along with a policy that I think will change when there's so much precedent for these things. The very things that I always wanted to have changed, get changed. No reason to think it's not going to happen in the future. And I think that's how we need to approach it with our children, that we want to stay faithful in those circumstances, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. I really appreciate that. A couple of last thoughts here. When can we get? I'm going to try to nail you down. When can I get Barbara Jones Brown on this podcast?
Oh, I'm sure we could arrange that
okay.
Pretty quickly.
All right, I got one. I nailed you down on one thing at least. That's good. Now our next with Al is here, he is stepping back here, and he's not going to be hosting as often as he once did. So I'm putting out the call to our listeners. If you want to be an occasional host of the Mormon News Roundup, then drop me a voicemail. You can do so on Anchor, or you can send an email to kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. We'd be very grateful for that. Let me just ask you a couple last questions, and we'll conclude things, Devery. Why do you support this podcast? Why does Signature Books support a Mormon News Roundup podcast at all?
Well, I think you're doing a good thing. I think for a lot of people, getting this kind of news and in a context where it's not just you're not just hearing about it, it's being discussed and analyzed, I think is a good thing. And I think I like to see these podcasts be successful. And so if we can contribute in any way, want to be able to do that if it helps. And plus it gets the word out about us. And so when we can support it, we know that there's a very good chance it'll increase our readership and increase our book sales. That's kind of the bottom line and the reason why anybody sponsors something like this to get the word out about them. And we want to do it on a podcast that is going to be that has something to offer. And I think yours is unique enough too. And I like that aspect of it.
That's good. Now, the last question I have for you about this podcast, what if anything, would you like to see be done differently on the Mormon News Roundup? Are we hitting a home run every time, or is there something that we need to improve upon? Or in other words, do you have a vision for this podcast that we are not currently, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think as long as you're covering news items that need to be talked about and should be and that are important enough, and you're hitting all those. I know it's not easy to get them all, and some weeks, like especially during conference weeks, there's going to be a lot more to talk about. But if it's drawing people in because they're not just hearing the same thing, it's not like just reading the church news, but you're willing to talk about anything that has to do with Mormonism that's important enough to talk about, whether it's positive, negative. Like with these murder trials coming up, and that I think that's important stuff, and people are going to want to talk about it. Not everybody has time to follow it real closely, like to the extent that someone who's just going to watch it every day, that the trials in session, where you get good summaries and good analysis of that, and where the church fits in. Most news coverage is going to just talk about the trial. You'll talk about it in the context of Mormonism, and that's going to interest a lot of people. And so that's what makes it unique as well. And I think as long as you're hitting all that stuff, and it doesn't sound like you're afraid to talk about certain subjects, that nothing's really off the table. I think that's what's really important about anyone that professes to be news, providing news or even news summaries, that nothing's off the table. And that'll draw people in. So.
Okay, well, that does take us to we always have a poll of the week here, the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. And if you can help me with this poll, it's kind of a joke poll, but we have a Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. And could you read, what is the poll for our of the week here, Devery?
Okay, you just want me to read these?
Read the question. What is the poll of the week?
What book would you most like to see Signature Books publish? Okay,
so we're giving you a couple selections here. For our listeners out there, you can select one of these 5 options here if you come on over to Spotify. And Devery would like you to read out these ones and also make your selection as to which one it is that you would like to see Signature Books publish. Is it number 1?
Diary of Fanny Alger, Building Faith in the Barn.
Yeah, that would be a hot diary if you could get it.
Yes,
I don't think you're
as long as it includes 1834 to 1836.
Yeah, that's the critical time frame. We don't want to hear about what she did in 1850s.
Yeah, don't want to hear about her life with Mr. Cutler, or whatever his name was.
That's going to be a hot item. Or how about number 2?
Book of Mormon History, The Incredible Life and Times of the Chemish.
Yeah, remember in the Book of Omni, he's only in one verse. That's going to be.
That's right.
That would be a tough book to write, by the way, but that would be one heck of a book to read. Or how about number 3?
The Book of Zelph, Another Testament of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, so this is independently published here, Devery. The Book of Zelph, Another Testament of the Book of Mormon. And this is fascinating. It was a gruesome crime scene. His beloved father was beheaded, and the prime suspect is his best friend Nephi. Will justice be served? Will he avenge the murder of his father? And it goes into Zelph and his life and times, because, of course, he died by an arrow, and he was the buddy of Onondagas. So this is a fascinating look. Could Signature Books pick that up? I'm not sure. What about number 4?
Swole for the Lord. How you too can get jacked just like Nephi in the Arnold Freiberg paintings.
Yeah. Now
that's great. Yeah. I always want to see his before pictures.
I've got a lot of work to do to get to that level. I can tell you that right now. Or how about number 5?
The Lost 116 Pages of the Book of Mormon. I think Mark Hoffman was working on those.
Yeah, he was.
Once upon a time, but
yeah. So which one of those books, Devery, if you were to, which one of those would you most like to see Signature Books publish?
Well, I think the Diary of Fanny Alger is the one I'd want, even over the 116 pages of the Book of Mormon.
Wow, you really like the gossip, don't you?
Yeah, I want to get to the bottom of that Fanny Alger story. So.
Absolutely. Now, our next next week, we're going to have Jonathan Streeter on from thoughtsandthingsandstuff.com. He has a very popular YouTube channel that discusses Mormonism and a bunch of other fascinating subjects. We're going to have him on next week. We're greatly looking forward to that. And, also shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. We really appreciate him. And Devery Anderson, thanks so much for coming on the Mormon News Roundup to ruminate with me on the Great and Spacious Beehive.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Okay, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
That's right.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily and then distribute it everywhere, all in one place, and it's free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer. So no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Spotify is the place to do it.
Hey there, brothers and sisters. Thanks for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. And if you are enjoying this show, please consider making a donation. Patreon makes an important contribution to helping us ruminate on the Great and Spacious Beehive here. So thanks so much to everyone for supporting us on patreon.com.